Imagine this. A successful businesswoman marries her charming fiancé, only for him to smash cake in her face at the reception because she looked too pretty. That's what happened to Astrid Lindqvist. But her response, a masterstroke of revenge that left him reeling. You have to hear how she flipped the script.
Thank you, Eliza, for this opportunity. It's empowering to share how I stood strong against the control and betrayal, transforming humiliation into my greatest victory. Let's dive into the story. My name is Astrid Lindqvist, and at 35, I thought I understood the difference between love and possession. I was wrong, but I learned quickly enough to save myself before it was too late. Growing up in a small Swedish town before immigrating to America at 20, I learned early that survival required both strength and strategy. My parents had sacrificed everything for our new life, and I was determined to honor that sacrifice by building something meaningful in this land of opportunity. What I didn't expect was how deeply American I would become, or how that dual identity would eventually save me from the biggest mistake of my life. I met Mark Henley at a corporate merger conference in Chicago. I was there representing my consulting firm, a business I'd built from nothing after 15 years of navigating American corporate culture as a foreign-born woman. My platinum blonde hair was pulled back in my signature sharp bob, and my ice blue eyes were focused on the presentation when he approached me during the networking break. "You're the one who restructured the Carlson deal," he said, extending his hand. "Mark Henley, investment banking, that was brilliant work." He was handsome in that polished American way, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident smile that had probably opened doors his entire life. What drew me to him wasn't just his looks, though. It was how he seemed genuinely impressed by my work, how he asked intelligent questions about my strategies, how he listened when I spoke about the challenges of building a business as a foreign-born woman who had become thoroughly American in her ambitions. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. The proposal itself should have been a red flag. He did it at his company's Christmas party, in front of all his colleagues, making a grand spectacle that felt more like a performance than an intimate moment between two people who loved each other. But I was swept up in the romance of it, the way everyone applauded, the way his mother Brenda dabbed at her eyes and called it perfect. The wedding planning began immediately, and that's when the cracks started to show. "I think we should have the ceremony at my family's country club," Mark announced one evening over dinner. "It's traditional. My parents were married there, my brother too." I looked up from my tablet where I'd been researching venues. I had fallen in love with a beautiful vineyard estate about an hour north, outdoor ceremony overlooking the valley, intimate and romantic, reflecting both my Scandinavian appreciation for nature and my American dreams of something uniquely ours. I was hoping for something more unique. I found this beautiful vineyard estate. The ceremony could be outdoors, overlooking the valley. It would be perfect for photos and the symbolism of growth, new beginnings. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "A vineyard? Astrid, this isn't some bohemian art show. It's our wedding." "Exactly, our wedding. Shouldn't it reflect both of us?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I felt my chest tighten, a familiar sensation from my early days in America when I'd learned to read the subtle signs of rejection, the moments when my foreign perspective clashed with established expectations. Finally, he set down his fork and reached across the table to cover my hand with his. "Of course, sweetheart, I just want everything to be perfect for you. But the country club has history, you know? Tradition. It means something." I should have pressed the issue, but I was still learning the subtle ways he redirected conversations when they didn't go his way. Instead, I nodded and smiled, already mentally calculating how I could make the country club feel more personal, more us. But us was becoming increasingly difficult to define. The dress shopping was another revelation. I'd fallen in love with a sleek, modern gown, silk crepe that hugged my curves and fell in clean lines to the floor. It reminded me of the sophisticated simplicity I'd admired in Swedish design, but with an American boldness that reflected who I'd become. It was elegant, sophisticated, and quintessentially me. When I emerged from the dressing room, my mother gasped, my sister started crying, and my best friend Emma immediately started taking pictures. "It's perfect," Emma breathed. "You look like a goddess, like you could conquer the world." But when Mark saw the photos later, his reaction was different. "It's very bold," he said, scrolling through the images on my phone. "Don't you think it might be a little too attention-grabbing? I mean, you'll be photographed all day." "That's rather the point, isn't it?" I laughed. It's our wedding day. Our wedding day, he repeated, but something in his tone made my stomach tight. I just think maybe something a little more traditional would be better. More classic. My mother saw some beautiful options at her friend's boutique. I felt my jaw clench, a defensive reaction I developed during my early American years when people questioned my choices or suggested I didn't understand how things were done here. Mark, I love this dress. I feel beautiful in it, confident. Isn't that what matters? He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled me into his arms. Of course you're beautiful, sweetheart. You're always beautiful. I just want to make sure you're comfortable, that's all, that you don't feel like you have to. Perform for everyone. The word perform stuck in my mind like a splinter. That night, lying in bed next to him, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when expressing my personal style had become performing. When had wanting to feel beautiful on my wedding day become attention-seeking? The real warning bells started ringing during the financial discussions. Mark suggested we open a joint account for wedding expenses and future shared costs. It made sense, in theory, we were building a life together after all. But when we sat down with his financial advisor, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Now, Astrid, the advisor said, shuffling through papers, Mark mentioned you have some business assets. We'll want to make sure those are properly protected in the marriage. Protected from what? I asked, my ice blue eyes narrowing with the same wariness that had served me well in countless business negotiations. Well, you know how it is with small businesses. They're risky, volatile. If something were to happen, we wouldn't want Mark's family assets to be exposed. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not embarrassment, but the controlled anger I'd learned to channel during my years building a business in a male-dominated field. My business isn't small, and it's not risky. I've been profitable for 8 years running. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. He's just being cautious, Astrid. It's smart planning. Smart planning would be protecting both our assets equally, I replied coolly. I assume you'll be putting your investment portfolio into a similar protective structure? The advisor's smile faltered. Well, that's a different situation entirely. That night, I called my own lawyer, David Restrepo, a sharp Harvard graduate who'd helped me navigate several complex business deals. I explained the situation, and his response was immediate and unambiguous. Astrid, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not, under any circumstances, sign anything that gives him access to your business or personal assets without my review, and I think we need to discuss some protective measures. What kind of protective measures? The kind that ensure if this marriage goes south, you're not left holding an empty bag. I'm talking about a comprehensive prenup, separate accounts, and what I like to call an emergency extraction plan. David, that sounds a bit dramatic. I'm getting married, not entering a war zone. Astrid, you're a successful businesswoman. You've built something valuable. In my experience, when someone tries to minimize your achievements or control your choices, it's not coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of insecurity and, frankly, greed. The prenup conversation with Mark was explosive. He accused me of not trusting him, of being influenced by bitter divorce lawyers who wanted to destroy our relationship. His mother was even worse. Astrid, dear, Brenda said during what was supposed to be a casual dinner at their family home, a prenup sends such a negative message. It's like planning for failure before you've even tried to succeed. In my day, women understood that marriage was about partnership, about supporting your husband's dreams. What about my dreams? I asked quietly, my Swedish directness cutting through the passive-aggressive sweetness. Well, of course, dear, but a woman's greatest dream should be a happy family, shouldn't it? A successful marriage? Mark has such potential. With the right support, he could really make something of himself. The subtext was clear. My role was to be the supportive wife, to use my resources to elevate his career, to dim my own light so his could shine brighter. But I'd spent too many years building my independence, learning to thrive in American business culture, to surrender it now. In the end, we compromised. Mark agreed to a modified prenup that protected my business assets, and I agreed to the joint account for wedding expenses and initial shared costs. But on David's advice, I also set up what he called Plan B, a set of pre-authorized instructions that could be triggered with a single phone call. Think of it as insurance, David explained. If everything goes well, you'll never need it. But if things go badly, you'll be protected. Plan B included immediate transfer of joint funds to a protected trust, retention of the city's top divorce attorney, and a comprehensive documentation package of any concerning behaviors or incidents. It seemed extreme at the time, but David's words echoed in my mind. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. As the wedding approached, the tension between Mark and me grew more pronounced. He criticized my choice of flowers, too exotic, my preference for a string quartet, too pretentious, and my decision to write my own vows, too personal for such a public event. Each disagreement felt like a small battle in a war I hadn't realized I was fighting. The final straw came during our rehearsal dinner. I was wearing a tailored navy suit that I'd bought for a recent business presentation, professional, elegant, and perfectly fitted to my tall Swedish frame. I felt confident and beautiful, my platinum bob catching the light as I moved through the room, greeting our guests. "You look stunning," Emma whispered as she hugged me, "like you could conquer the world." But when I found Mark near the bar, his expression was thunderous. "Really, Astrid, a business suit, to our rehearsal dinner?" "It's a beautiful suit," I replied, confused. "I thought you liked it." "At a board meeting, sure, but this is a family celebration." "You look like you're about to give a presentation instead of celebrating our marriage." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not embarrassment, but anger. The same anger I'd felt countless times when American colleagues had questioned my choices, my competence, my right to take up space. "Mark, this is who I am. I'm a businesswoman, I'm successful. I thought that's what you loved about me." "I love you, Astrid, but sometimes I feel like you forget that this isn't all about you. Other people matter too. My family, my friends, they have expectations. Expectations about how I should dress, how I should behave. Expectations about what a wife should be like," he said quietly, but his words carried the weight of a threat. That night, lying in my hotel room, we decided to spend the night apart, another tradition I'd agreed to despite my preferences. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My ice blue eyes reflected the city lights streaming through the window, and for the first time since accepting his proposal, I allowed myself to really see what was happening. Mark didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory. A beautiful, successful accessory that would enhance his image while never outshining him. He wanted my money, my connections, my business acumen, but only as long as they served his purposes and never challenged his position as the dominant force in our relationship. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found David's number. It was late, but he'd told me to call anytime if I had concerns. "Astrid, is everything all right?" "David, I need to ask you something. If I wanted to activate Plan B tomorrow, how quickly could it happen?" There was a pause. "Immediately, everything's in place. Are you having second thoughts?" I closed my eyes, my platinum hair spread across the hotel pillow like spilled moonlight. "I'm having first thoughts, real thoughts. For the first time in months." "What do you want to do?" "I want to go through with the wedding," I said finally, "but I want to go in prepared. If Mark is the man I hope he is, Plan B will never be necessary, but if he's the man I'm starting to suspect he is." "Then you'll be ready," David finished. "Astrid, I'm proud of you. It takes courage to see the truth, especially when the truth is uncomfortable." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would be ready for it. My ice blue eyes reflected a new determination as I finally drifted off to sleep. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, I would need every bit of that preparation. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden autumn light that photographers dream of. I woke in my hotel suite feeling surprisingly calm, considering the doubts that had plagued me the night before. Perhaps it was the clarity that comes with having a plan, or maybe it was simply the relief of knowing that whatever happened, I was prepared. Emma arrived at 7 a.m. with coffee and pastries, followed by my hair and makeup team. The suite transformed into a bustling preparation center, filled with the soft chatter of my bridesmaids, the gentle hum of blow dryers, and the occasional pop of a champagne cork. "You're glowing," my sister Ingrid observed as the makeup artist applied the final touches. "I haven't seen you look this serene in months." She was right. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman in control of her destiny. My platinum blonde hair had been styled into my signature sharp bob, but softer somehow, with subtle waves that caught the light. My ice blue eyes were enhanced with neutral tones that made them appear even more striking. I looked like myself, the best version of myself. The dress was everything I'd remembered and more. The silk crepe hugged my tall frame perfectly, the clean lines emphasizing my Scandinavian elegance, while the subtle beading caught the light with every movement. I felt powerful, beautiful, and completely authentic. Despite all of Mark's criticisms and suggestions for something more traditional, I had held firm on this choice. Looking at myself now, I knew I had been right to fight for it. Mark is going to lose his mind when he sees you, Emma laughed, adjusting my veil. You look absolutely stunning. But even as my friends and family showered me with compliments, I couldn't shake the memory of Mark's reaction to my rehearsal dinner outfit. Would he see my beauty as something to celebrate, or something to contain? The venue looked like something from a fairy tale. Despite my initial preference for the vineyard, with its natural beauty and symbolic meaning of growth and new beginnings, Mark's family country club had been transformed into something magical. White roses and eucalyptus draped every surface, candles flickered in tall glass hurricanes, and gossamer fabric billowed from the ceiling like clouds. It was beautiful, traditional, and completely impersonal, exactly what Mark and his family had wanted. As I waited in the bridal suite for the ceremony to begin, I received a text from David. Remember, you're in control today. Trust your instincts. Plan B is ready if you need it. The message should have been reassuring, but instead it sent a chill down my spine. Why did I need to be reminded that I was in control on my own wedding day? The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional vows and scripted responses. Mark looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, his smile perfect for the cameras. But when I looked into his eyes during our vows, I saw something that made my stomach tighten, a kind of proprietary satisfaction, as if he were claiming a prize rather than pledging his love to a partner. His vows were generic, filled with phrases about supporting each other and building a life together, but they felt rehearsed, performed for the audience rather than spoken from the heart. I had spent weeks crafting personal vows about partnership, growth, and mutual respect, words that reflected my Swedish values of equality and my American dreams of shared success. But looking into his eyes, seeing that calculating satisfaction, I found myself reciting the traditional vows we'd agreed upon instead. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way he gripped my hands just a little too tightly, in the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, in the way his mother Brenda watched me with an expression that was more calculating than celebratory. The photographer captured every moment, every angle, every expression. Later, those photos would tell a story I couldn't have imagined. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, the comments began. "Astrid, you look absolutely radiant," one of Mark's colleagues said. "That dress is incredible. You're going to steal the show at every event from now on." I smiled and thanked him, but I noticed Mark's jaw tighten beside me. The muscle in his cheek twitched, a sign I'd learned to recognize over our months together. "She does clean up nicely," Mark replied with a laugh that sounded forced. "Though I keep telling her she doesn't need to try so hard. Natural beauty is best, right?" The comment stung, not because it was particularly cruel, but because it was so dismissive. I hadn't tried hard, I had simply chosen to look my best on my wedding day. The fact that he saw this as somehow inappropriate or excessive was telling. As the evening progressed, the comments continued. Guests complimented my dress, my hair, my makeup, my overall radiance. Each compliment seemed to irritate Mark more. I watched him drink more champagne than usual, his smile becoming more strained with each passing hour. I could see Brenda across the room, her eyes tracking every interaction, every compliment I received, her expression growing more pinched with each passing moment. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" he murmured in my ear during a brief moment when we were alone. "Enjoying what?" My ice blue eyes searched his face, seeing something cold and calculating that made my breath catch. "All the attention. All the compliments, you're practically glowing with it." I turned to face him fully, my ice blue eyes searching his face. "Mark, it's our wedding day. People are being kind. Isn't that normal?" Normal would be if they were complimenting us as a couple. Instead, it's all about you. Your dress, your beauty, your success. What about me? What about us? The jealousy in his voice was unmistakable, and suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't about me being inappropriate or attention-seeking. This was about Mark's fundamental inability to share the spotlight, even on our wedding day, even on what should have been the happiest day of our lives together. "Mark," I said carefully, my voice carrying the diplomatic tone I'd perfected in business negotiations, "I can't control what other people say. I'm just trying to enjoy our wedding. Are you? Because it feels like you're trying to make sure everyone knows who the real star is here." Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator approached us with a bright smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Henley, it's time for your first dance." The first dance was supposed to be romantic, a moment of intimacy shared in front of our loved ones. We'd chosen a classic song, something timeless and elegant that reflected the life I thought we were building together. But as Mark pulled me into his arms on the dance floor, I felt none of the joy I'd expected. "You see how they're all looking at you." He whispered in my ear, his voice tight with suppressed anger. You did that on purpose, didn't you? Making sure you were the main event. I pulled back slightly to look at his face, shocked by the venom in his voice. The man holding me looked like Mark, but his eyes were cold and hostile in a way I'd never seen before. Mark, what are you talking about? The dress, the hair, the whole production. You couldn't just be a normal bride, could you? You had to make sure everyone would remember this as Astrid's show, not our wedding. The song continued to play, but I felt like I was dancing with a stranger. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who had seemed to admire my confidence and success. This was someone else entirely, someone petty, insecure, and cruel. I don't understand, I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the music. I thought you wanted me to look beautiful. Beautiful, yes. Show-stopping, attention-grabbing, look at me beautiful? That's different, that's selfish. The song ended and we separated to polite applause, but the damage was done. As we moved through the rest of the reception, the toasts, the dinner, the traditional celebrations, I felt like I was watching everything from a great distance. The man I had married was not the man I thought I knew. During dinner, Brenda made a point of visiting our table. Astrid, dear, you look lovely, she said, but her tone was cool. Though I do hope you'll consider toning things down a bit in the future. A wife should compliment her husband, not compete with him. The comment was delivered with a smile, but the message was clear. In the Henley family, women were expected to be decorative but not distracting, beautiful but not breathtaking, successful but not more successful than their husbands. I excused myself and went to the ladies' room, needing a moment to process what was happening. In the mirror, I saw a woman who looked exactly as a bride should look, radiant, happy, beautiful. But underneath the surface, I saw something else, the dawning realization that I had made a terrible mistake. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. You okay? You seemed upset after the first dance. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. I think I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in months. When I returned to the reception, it was time for the cake cutting. The 5-tiered masterpiece stood on a table surrounded by flowers, a symbol of sweetness and celebration that now felt like a mockery of everything this day was supposed to represent. As Mark and I approached it together, I hoped that this traditional moment might restore some of the joy that had been leached from our day. The photographer positioned us carefully, adjusting the lighting for the perfect shot. We picked up the silver knife together, our hands overlapping on the handle. The cameras flashed, capturing what should have been a moment of pure happiness. Smile, sweetheart, Mark murmured, but his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, something dangerous and barely controlled. I smiled, but something in his posture made me tense. He was holding the knife too tightly, his body rigid with barely contained emotion. I could feel the anger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. You got what you wanted, didn't you? He said quietly, his voice so low that only I could hear it over the chatter of our guests. Everyone's looking at you, talking about you, admiring you, the perfect Astrid show. Mark, please, I whispered, my ice blue eyes meeting his and seeing nothing but cold fury. Not here, not now. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the cake, and I could see his jaw working as he fought to control whatever was building inside him. Around us, our guests waited expectantly, cameras ready to capture this sweet moment of tradition. We cut the first slice together, the knife sliding smoothly through the layers of vanilla cake and raspberry filling. Tradition dictated that we would each take a small, delicate bite, feeding each other with gentle care. It was supposed to be sweet, romantic, symbolic of the tenderness we would show each other throughout our marriage. Instead, Mark scooped up a large chunk of cake, far more than was appropriate for the traditional feeding. For a split second, I thought he was just being playful, maybe trying to inject some levity into the moment. I was wrong. His face was a mask of pure rage as he looked at me, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. You wanted the attention, right? And then he smashed the cake into my face. The world stopped. That's the only way I can describe the moment when vanilla buttercream and raspberry filling exploded across my face, my carefully styled hair, my custom silk gown. Time seemed suspended as the reality of what was happening crashed over me like a wave of ice water. The sweetness coated my nostrils, making it difficult to breathe, while chunks of cake fell to the floor around my feet with soft, wet sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence. But Mark wasn't finished. This wasn't a playful cake smash that had gotten out of hand. This was deliberate, vicious, and calculated. He ground the cake into my face, his knuckles pressing against my cheek as he worked the sticky mess into my platinum bob, ensuring that every strand was coated with frosting and filling. I could feel the buttercream sliding down my neck and onto the bodice of my dress, staining the pristine silk that had made me feel so beautiful just moments before. The sensation was violating, humiliating, degrading, exactly what he intended. I felt pieces of cake sliding down inside my dress, the sticky sweetness adhering to my skin like a second layer of shame. My eyes were clenched shut against the assault, raspberry filling burning as it seeped toward my lashes. The weight of the cake matted my carefully styled hair against my scalp, and I could feel the elaborate makeup that had taken hours to perfect dissolving under the sugary assault. The silence in the room was deafening. 200 people, our friends, our families, our colleagues, watched in stunned disbelief as my new husband continued his assault. I could sense the collective intake of breath, the shocked gasps, the horrified whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. I could feel the eyes of every single guest burning into me as I stood there, humiliated and shocked, my wedding dress ruined, my dignity stripped away in front of everyone we knew. Through the cake covering my eyes, I caught a glimpse of my mother's face in my peripheral vision, her hand pressed to her mouth in horror, her ice-blue eyes, so like my own, wide with shock and fury. My sister Ingrid had started to move toward me, her face contorted with rage, but my father caught her arm, his own face a mask of controlled fury that reminded me of the quiet strength that had carried our family through immigration and adaptation to American life. Then Mark's voice boomed across the reception hall, his words echoing off the elegant walls and crystal chandeliers like a declaration of war. "The attention should be on me." The declaration hung in the air like a toxic cloud. This wasn't about playfulness or tradition or even anger. This was about power, about control, about a man who couldn't bear the thought that his wife might outshine him, even on their wedding day. About someone so fundamentally insecure that he would physically assault his bride in front of 200 witnesses rather than allow her to receive compliments on her beauty. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. From a table near the front of the room, a single sound cut through the horrified silence. Clapping. Slow, deliberate, approving applause that seemed to echo through the stunned reception hall like gunshots. It was Brenda, Mark's mother. She was sitting at her table, beaming with pride, her hands coming together in steady rhythm as if she were applauding a particularly impressive performance. Her face glowed with satisfaction, as if her son had finally done something she'd been waiting for him to do. Her expression was one of pure approval, as if Mark had just demonstrated exactly the kind of dominance she believed a husband should show his wife. "That's my boy," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Finally showing her who's boss? The words hit me like physical blows. This woman, who had spent months making subtle comments about a wife's proper place, about not outshining your husband, about the importance of supporting a man's ego, was celebrating her son's assault on his wife. She was proud of what he had done. The applause continued, joined by a few of Mark's fraternity brothers who seemed to think this was some kind of elaborate joke, their uncomfortable laughter mixing with Brenda's enthusiastic clapping. But most of the room remained frozen in shock, unable to process what they were witnessing. I could see Emma's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth open in horror. I could see my business colleagues, people who respected my strategic thinking and professional competence, staring in disbelief at this public humiliation. I could see the wedding photographer, her camera still clicking away, capturing every moment of this beautiful disaster for posterity. I stood there, cake dripping from my chin, and felt something crystallize inside me. It wasn't just anger, though that was certainly part of it, a cold, controlled fury that reminded me of my father's quiet strength when faced with discrimination in our early American years. It wasn't just humiliation, though the embarrassment burned like acid in my chest. It was clarity. Pure, cold, absolute clarity that cut through all the confusion and self-doubt of the past months. This was who Mark really was. This was who he had always been, underneath the charm and the smooth words and the romantic gestures. He was a man who saw my success as a threat, my beauty as competition, my very existence as something that needed to be managed and controlled. He was someone so fundamentally insecure that he would destroy his own wedding rather than allow his wife to receive positive attention. And his mother, the woman who had spent months grooming me to accept this treatment, preparing me to normalize this level of disrespect and abuse, she had been orchestrating this moment all along. She had been training me to accept diminishment, to apologize for my own light, to believe that a wife's role was to make her husband feel superior at any cost. But I was Astrid Lindqvist. I had built a $1 million business from nothing. I had survived the challenges of immigration, of being a foreign-born woman in American corporate culture, of facing down hostile takeovers and dismissive investors. I had adapted to a new country while maintaining my essential self, had learned to thrive in American business culture without losing my Swedish values of equality and directness. I had not come this far, had not overcome so much, to be humiliated by a man-child and his enabling mother. I met Mark's eyes, those eyes that had once seemed so loving, so admiring, and saw them clearly for the first time. They were cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. He was proud of what he had done. He thought he had put me in my place, taught me a lesson about who was really in charge. He expected me to cry, to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness, and promise to be a better, more submissive wife. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse or run or give him the dramatic reaction he was clearly expecting. Instead, I held his gaze with my ice-blue eyes, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut wire. I wanted everyone in that room to see this moment, to understand exactly what kind of man Mark Henley was, to witness his true character revealed under pressure. Then, very deliberately, I reached up and wiped a smear of frosting from my cheek with the back of my hand. The gesture was calm, controlled, almost elegant despite the mess covering my face and dress. It was the same composed movement I used when handling difficult clients or hostile negotiations, a demonstration of grace under pressure that had served me well throughout my career. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the silent room despite the cake still clinging to my lips, "for showing me exactly who you are." The words were delivered with the same diplomatic precision I'd learned in business, but they carried the weight of absolute finality. This wasn't anger speaking, this was strategy. This was a woman who had just received all the information she needed to make a life-changing decision. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't stumble. I walked with the same confident stride I used when entering a boardroom, my head held high despite the cake matted in my hair. I walked past my shocked bridesmaids, past the open-mouthed wedding photographer whose camera was still clicking away, capturing every second of this beautiful disaster. I walked with the dignity my parents had taught me, the strength they had modeled when facing discrimination and hardship in our new country. I could hear murmurs starting behind me as the shock began to wear off. I heard my father's voice, low and dangerous, saying something to Mark in the controlled tone I remembered from my childhood when someone had underestimated our family. I heard Emma calling my name, her voice thick with tears and rage. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked straight through the reception hall, past the elegant decorations and flickering candles, past the beautiful life I had thought I was building. I walked past the 5-tiered cake that was supposed to symbolize sweetness and celebration, past the flowers that were supposed to represent new beginnings, past the guests who were supposed to be celebrating our love. I walked out into the cool night air, where the stars were shining down on what should have been the happiest day of my life. My phone was in my small bridal purse, miraculously unscathed by Mark's cake assault. My fingers were steady as I scrolled through my contacts, finding the number I hoped I would never need to use. The number that represented my insurance policy, my strategic backup plan, my plan B. David answered on the second ring. "Astrid, is everything all right?" "David," I said, my voice calm and clear despite the cake still sliding down my face. "It's Astrid. Authorize plan B, all of it. Immediately." There was a pause. I could hear the concern in his voice when he spoke again, but also the recognition that I was speaking from a place of absolute certainty. "Are you sure, Astrid? Are you safe?" I looked back at the country club, where warm light spilled from the windows, and I could see the silhouettes of our wedding guests still frozen in shock. Somewhere in there, Mark was probably trying to explain his behavior, to make it seem like a joke that had gone too far. His mother was probably consoling him, telling him that I was overreacting, that I would come to my senses and apologize. They were both wrong. "Perfectly safe," I replied, wiping another smear of frosting from my cheek with the back of my hand. "And perfectly sure." "Consider it done," David said, his voice carrying the efficiency that had made him one of the city's top attorneys. "The transfers will be complete within 30 minutes. The divorce papers will be filed first thing Monday morning." "And Astrid?" "Yes." I'm proud of you. It takes tremendous courage to walk away from a situation like this. I hung up and stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. Plan B was already in motion. The joint account that Mark thought contained our shared future, funded 90% by my money, was being transferred to a protected trust that he couldn't touch. The retainer for the city's top divorce attorney was being paid. The evidence package was being compiled, including the high-resolution photos and 4K video that my photographer friend had captured of Mark's assault. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with texts. Emma, my sister, my mother, even some of the wedding guests who had witnessed the spectacle. But I ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later, time for comfort and support and planning the next steps. Right now, I just wanted to go home. To my apartment with my things, in the life I had built for myself. I wanted to wash the cake from my hair, change out of the ruined dress, and begin the process of reclaiming my future. As I drove through the quiet streets, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My platinum bob was a mess of frosting and cake, my makeup was smeared, and my dress was stained beyond repair. I looked like a woman who had been through a war, but my ice blue eyes were clear and determined. I looked like a woman who had survived, who had seen the truth and refused to be its victim. I looked like someone who had just escaped the biggest mistake of her life. Mark thought he had humiliated me, broken me, put me in my place. Instead, he had set me free. And tomorrow morning, he was going to discover just how expensive his little power play had been. I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was devastated or heartbroken, though there was certainly grief for the future I had thought I was building, but because there was too much to do. Plan B wasn't just about financial protection. It was about complete strategic withdrawal from a situation that had revealed itself to be toxic. The adrenaline of clarity was still coursing through my veins, the same focused energy I'd felt during my most challenging business negotiations. By 3 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, methodically documenting everything that had happened. Every comment Mark had made about my appearance, every attempt to control my choices, every red flag I had dismissed or rationalized. David would need a comprehensive record for the divorce proceedings, and I was nothing if not thorough. I documented the venue change from my preferred vineyard to his family's country club, his criticism of my dress choice, his attempts to control our financial arrangements, and tonight's assault, all part of a pattern of dominance and control that I could now see clearly. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the reception. Messages from family, friends, and even some of the wedding guests who had witnessed Mark's assault. I read them all, but I didn't respond. Not yet. First, I needed to complete the process I had started. The messages ranged from outrage to support to confusion, but the overwhelming sentiment was shock at Mark's behavior and admiration for my composed response. At 6 a.m., my doorbell rang. It was Emma, holding a bag of groceries and wearing the same bridesmaid dress from the night before, her makeup smeared from crying. "I brought coffee," she said simply, "and chocolate, and wine in case we need it later." I let her in, grateful for her presence but not quite ready to talk about what had happened. She took one look at me, showered, dressed in my favorite jeans and sweater, my platinum bob restored to its sharp, clean lines, and nodded approvingly. "You look like yourself again," she observed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said, and realized that I actually meant it. Better than fine, actually, I feel clear. The word captured exactly what I was experiencing, a crystalline clarity that had replaced months of confusion and self-doubt. Emma studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who had known me for over a decade. "You're not just putting on a brave face?" "No," I said, pouring coffee for both of us. "I'm genuinely relieved. Last night, when Mark smashed that cake in my face, it was like someone had finally turned on the lights. I could see everything clearly for the first time in months." "The way he looked at you," Emma said quietly, settling into my kitchen chair. "I've never seen anything like it. Pure hatred. And his mother," she shuddered. The applause was the worst part. How could she applaud her son humiliating his wife? "Because she doesn't see me as a person," I replied, my voice carrying the analytical tone I used in business assessments. "She sees me as a threat to her son's ego that needed to be neutralized." The cake smashing wasn't an explosion of anger. It was a calculated attempt to break me down, to teach me my place in their family hierarchy. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. "What happens now?" I showed her the documentation I had been compiling, the timeline of concerning behaviors, the financial records that proved how much of our joint assets had actually come from my accounts. Now I make sure that Mark learns there are consequences for treating people the way he treated me. Astrid, Emma said carefully, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but are you sure you want to go nuclear on this? Maybe he'll realize he made a mistake, apologize. Emma, I interrupted, my ice blue eyes meeting hers steadily. Mark didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. He chose to humiliate me in front of 200 people because he couldn't handle the fact that I looked beautiful on my wedding day. He chose to physically assault me because his ego was threatened by compliments from our guests, and his mother chose to applaud him for it. I paused, letting that sink in. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was the revelation of who they really are, and now they're going to discover who I really am. At 9 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. It was David, calling with an update. The transfers are complete, he said. The joint account has been emptied and the funds moved to the protected trust. I've also initiated the divorce proceedings. The papers will be served this morning. What about the evidence package? Your photographer friend delivered the files at 7 a.m. The video footage is particularly damning. You can see Mark's face clearly, and it's obvious this wasn't playful. It was aggressive and deliberate. Combined with your documentation of the pattern of controlling behavior, we have a very strong case. Good, I said. What's the timeline? Given the circumstances and the evidence, I expect we can have this resolved quickly. Mark's behavior was witnessed by 200 people, and we have it documented in high definition. His attorney will likely advise him to settle rather than let this go to trial. After I hung up, Emma looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You really planned for this, didn't you? I planned for the possibility, I corrected. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but I wasn't going to be naive about the risks. My father taught me to hope for the best but plan for the worst, a lesson that served our family well when we immigrated to America. Your father's going to be proud of you, Emma said. The way you handled yourself last night, I've never seen anything like it. You were like ice and steel. She was right. Standing in that reception hall with cake dripping from my face, I had felt something shift inside me. Not just anger or hurt, but a kind of crystalline clarity that cut through all the emotions and confusion. I had seen the situation for exactly what it was, and I had responded accordingly. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Astrid? The voice was Mark's, but he sounded different, uncertain, worried. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. Astrid, we need to talk. No, I said calmly. We don't. Come on, sweetheart, don't be like this. I know I got a little carried away last night, but it was just a joke that went too far. Everyone's making a big deal out of nothing. The casual dismissal of his assault, the attempt to minimize and gaslight, only confirmed that I had made the right choice. This was exactly the response I had expected. No accountability, no genuine remorse, just an attempt to reframe his violence as my overreaction. Mark, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, what you did last night wasn't a joke. It was assault. It was humiliation. It was a deliberate attempt to break me down in front of everyone we know. That's not your overreacting. It was just cake, Astrid. It's not like I hit you or anything. You ground cake into my face and hair while screaming at me in front of 200 people. Your mother applauded you for it, and now you're calling to tell me I'm overreacting. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You're right about one thing, though. You didn't hit me, because if you had, you'd be talking to the police right now instead of me. Astrid, please, I love you. We can work this out. I'll apologize, we'll go on our honeymoon, and everything will be fine. Everything will never be fine, Mark, because I finally see you clearly. You don't love me. You love the idea of owning me. You love having a successful, beautiful wife as long as she doesn't outshine you or threaten your fragile ego. That's not true. It is true, and now you're going to face the consequences of your choices. I hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, the phone rang again, but this time I didn't answer. I had said everything I needed to say to Mark Henley. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Emma and I ordered breakfast, talked about practical matters like changing my name back. I had never actually changed it, another small blessing, and began the process of untangling the life I had thought I was building with Mark. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Process server confirmed delivery. Mark has been served with divorce papers. Also, his attorney called. They want to discuss settlement terms immediately. I showed the message to Emma, who grinned. That was fast. When someone's behavior is indefensible, their lawyers usually advise them to settle quickly and quietly, I explained. Mark's assault was witnessed by 200 people and captured in 4K video. His attorney knows this isn't a fight they can win. What do you think Mark's doing right now? Emma asked. I considered this. Probably calling his mother, looking for sympathy and support. Probably trying to figure out how to spin this as my fault. Probably discovering that his credit cards aren't working and his bank account is empty. You really emptied the account? I transferred my money out of the account, I corrected. The money I had deposited to pay for our wedding, our honeymoon, our future home down payment. It was my money, and I took it back. Emma was quiet for a moment. How much are we talking about? $347,000, I said calmly. Mark contributed about $23,000 to the account. I left him enough to cover his portion plus a little extra for immediate expenses. Jesus, Astrid, he must be losing his mind. Probably, but that's not my problem anymore. At 2 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Brenda. Astrid, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mark is devastated. He feels terrible about what happened, and he just wants to make things right. There's no misunderstanding, Brenda, I replied, my Swedish directness cutting through her manipulation. Your son assaulted me at our wedding reception, and you applauded him for it. The only thing I'm devastated about is that it took me so long to see both of you clearly. Now, dear, you're being dramatic. It was just a little cake. Boys will be boys, you know. Mark has always been spirited. Spirited, I repeated flatly. Is that what you call it when a grown man physically assaults his wife because he's jealous of the attention she's receiving? You did look rather attention-seeking last night, Brenda said, her mask of sweetness beginning to slip. Perhaps if you had chosen something more modest, more appropriate for a wife. Brenda, I interrupted, I'm going to stop you right there. I looked beautiful on my wedding day because I chose to look beautiful. I wore a dress that made me feel confident and elegant because it was my wedding day. The fact that your son couldn't handle his wife looking stunning says everything about him and nothing about me. Well, I never. No, you never did. You never respected me, never saw me as anything more than an accessory to your son's life. You spent months making little comments about a wife's proper place, about not outshining my husband, about supporting his ego instead of pursuing my own dreams. You were grooming me to accept abuse, and last night when your son finally delivered it, you applauded. There was silence on the other end of the line. I want you to understand something very clearly, Brenda. I am not a woman who accepts abuse. I am not a woman who can be broken down or controlled. I am a woman who built $1 million business from nothing, and I am more than capable of protecting myself from people like you and your son. You can't do this to him, Brenda said, her voice now openly hostile. Mark is a good man, he has a future, a career. Mark is a man who assaulted his wife in front of 200 witnesses because his ego couldn't handle her looking beautiful. His future and his career are his responsibility, not mine, and if they suffer because of his choices, that's called consequences. I hung up and immediately blocked both their numbers. There was nothing more to be said. Emma looked at me with something approaching awe. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You won't, I said simply, because you're not the kind of person who would assault someone for looking beautiful or applaud someone else for doing it. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. We ordered Thai food, watched mindless television, and gradually I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine relaxation. The constant tension I had been carrying, the feeling that I was walking on eggshells, the sense that I was somehow failing to meet impossible expectations, all of it was gone. I was free. That evening, as Emma was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. Astrid, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. Last night, watching you walk away from that reception hall, I've never been more proud to be your friend. You showed incredible strength. I showed incredible clarity, I corrected. The strength was always there. I just finally let myself use it. After she left, I sat in my apartment as the sun set over the city, my ice blue eyes reflecting the changing light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers, paperwork, the process of officially ending a marriage that had lasted less than 24 hours. But tonight, I was simply grateful. Grateful that Mark had shown me who he really was before it was too late. Grateful that I had been smart enough to protect myself. Grateful that I was strong enough to walk away from a situation that would have slowly destroyed my spirit and my sense of self. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from David. Mark's attorney called again. They're proposing a quick, quiet settlement. No alimony, clean break, confidentiality agreement. They want this to go away as fast as possible. I typed back. Counteroffer. Quick, quiet settlement, no alimony, clean break, no confidentiality agreement. If Mark wants this to go away, he can behave himself going forward, but I won't be silenced about what happened. David's response was immediate. Understood. I'll communicate the terms. I set the phone aside and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow, Mark would wake up to discover that his attempt to humiliate and control me had cost him his wife, his marriage, and a significant amount of money. He would learn that there are consequences for treating people with cruelty and disrespect. But tonight, I was simply a woman who had escaped a toxic situation with her dignity, her assets, and her future intact. I was a woman who had refused to be broken, who had chosen strength over submission, who had walked away from abuse with her head held high. I was Astrid Lindqvist, and I was finally completely free. Mark woke up alone in the honeymoon suite at 11:47 a.m., his head pounding from too much champagne and his mouth tasting like regret and poor decisions. The luxury suite that was supposed to be the first morning of our married life together was empty except for him, his wrinkled tuxedo from the night before, and the crushing weight of consequences he hadn't yet begun to understand. I know this because the hotel concierge, who had become a friend during the wedding planning process, called me later to describe the scene. Mark had stumbled around the suite for 20 minutes, calling my name, checking the bathroom, the balcony, even the closet, as if I might be hiding somewhere waiting to surprise him. Apparently, he had expected me to return sometime during the night, tail between my legs, ready to apologize for my overreaction to his assault. My clothes were gone. My suitcase was gone. Even my toiletries had been removed from the bathroom counter. The only trace of my presence was the faint scent of my perfume and a single earring on the nightstand, one that had fallen out during the cake assault. According to the concierge, Mark's first call was to my phone. When that went straight to voicemail, he tried calling the front desk. "This is Mark Henley in the honeymoon suite," he said, his voice already showing signs of panic. "My wife seems to have stepped out." "Did you see her leave this morning?" "Mr. Henley," the concierge replied carefully, "Mrs. Lindqvist checked out last night around midnight. She asked us to prepare her final bill separately from yours." There was a long silence. "What do you mean, separately? We're married. We have a joint account." "Sir, Mrs. Lindqvist specifically requested that her charges be billed to her personal card. She was quite clear about that." Mark's second call was to room service. He ordered an elaborate breakfast for 2, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, champagne, pastries, apparently still believing that I would return and that we could somehow salvage our wedding weekend with a romantic morning meal. The delusion was staggering, but not surprising given his complete inability to understand the gravity of what he had done. When the room service arrived, Mark was dressed in one of the hotel's plush bathrobes, his hair still disheveled from the night before. He had the server set up the breakfast on the suite's private balcony, with its view of the city skyline, and then sat down to wait for me to return. He was still waiting, picking at cold eggs and flat champagne when his third visitor of the morning arrived. The knock on the door was sharp, professional, and persistent. When Mark opened it, he found a tall man in a crisp suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Mark Henley?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" "I'm a process server." "I have documents for you." Mark took the envelope with confusion rather than alarm. "Documents? What kind of documents? I'm on my honeymoon." The process server's expression was carefully neutral. "Divorce papers, sir. You've been served." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in the doorway of the honeymoon suite, holding the legal documents that would officially end our marriage before it had even truly begun. I can only imagine his face as he opened the envelope and saw the petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by Astrid Lindqvist, citing irreconcilable differences and extreme cruelty. The papers were thorough, professional, and devastating in their clinical description of his behavior. David had worked through the night to ensure they were filed first thing Monday morning, and the process server had been dispatched immediately. But the real shock was yet to come. Mark's fourth call of the morning was to our joint bank account. He needed to pay for the room service, the extended stay in the suite, and probably planned to book a spa day or some other gesture designed to win me back when I inevitably returned. The automated system cheerfully informed him that the account balance was $7.42. He hung up and called back, certain there had been a mistake. The balance was still $7.42. His fifth call was to the bank's customer service line, where a patient representative explained that large transfers had been authorized the previous evening, moving the majority of the account's funds to an external trust. The transfer had been completed at 11, 7:47 p.m. the night before, exactly 12 hours before he woke up to discover his new reality. "But that's impossible," Mark sputtered. "My wife can't just empty our account without my permission." "Sir," the representative explained, "according to our records, the account holder who initiated the transfers was the primary depositor for the funds in question. The transfers were properly authorized and completed according to the account terms." Mark's sixth call was to his mother. Brenda answered on the first ring, her voice bright with the anticipation of hearing about our romantic honeymoon morning. "Mark, darling, how's married life? Is Astrid feeling better this morning?" "I'm sure she's embarrassed about her little tantrum last night." "Mom," Mark said, his voice tight with panic, "Astrid's gone. She left. She had divorce papers served on me this morning and she emptied our bank account." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "That's impossible. She's just being dramatic. Women do that sometimes when their feelings are hurt. She'll come back." "No, Mom, you don't understand. She took everything. $300,000, gone, and these divorce papers. They're real. They're filed with the court. There are photos, Mom, photos and video from last night." "Photos of what?" "Of me. Of the cake thing. They're calling it assault." Another silence, longer this time. When Brenda spoke again, her voice had lost its cheerful confidence. "Mark, you need to call a lawyer. Right now." Mark's seventh call was to his attorney, who listened to the situation with growing alarm and immediately advised him to say nothing more over the phone. "Mark, I need you to come to my office immediately. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't post anything on social media. Don't call Astrid or her family. Just come here and we'll figure out how to handle this." But Mark wasn't done making mistakes. His eighth call was to my sister Ingrid, apparently believing that family loyalty would overcome the evidence of his behavior. "Ingrid, it's Mark. I need to talk to Astrid. I know she's upset, but this is getting out of hand." "We can work this out." Ingrid's response was swift and brutal. "Mark, I was there last night. I saw what you did to my sister. I saw your mother applaud you for it. If you ever contact anyone in our family again, I will personally make sure that video of your assault gets posted on every social media platform in existence." She hung up before he could respond. By early afternoon, word of our dissolved marriage had spread through our social circle like wildfire. The wedding guests who had witnessed Mark's assault were already talking, sharing their shock and outrage with friends and colleagues. The story was too dramatic, too appalling, to keep quiet. Social media began buzzing with cryptic posts from wedding attendees, and while no one posted the actual video, the descriptions were vivid enough to paint a clear picture of what had happened. Mark's fraternity brothers, who had initially seemed amused by his alpha male display at the reception, were now distancing themselves as the reality of the situation became clear. Having a friend who pranked, his wife with cake was one thing. Being associated with someone who had committed assault and been served with divorce papers was another entirely. His colleagues at the investment firm were equally quick to distance themselves. Corporate culture had little tolerance for men who made headlines for the wrong reasons, and Mark's behavior was exactly the kind of scandal that could damage the firm's reputation. By evening, Mark had been forced to move out of the honeymoon suite and into a standard room, paying with his personal credit card since our joint account was effectively frozen. He spent the night making increasingly desperate phone calls to friends and family, trying to find someone who would support his version of events. But there were 200 witnesses to what had happened, and many of them had cell phone videos in addition to the professional footage captured by our photographer. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Meanwhile, I spent that Sunday in my apartment, fielding calls from friends and family who wanted to express their support and outrage on my behalf. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were shocked by Mark's behavior and impressed by my calm, strategic response. "I can't believe how composed you were," my mother said during one of our calls. "Walking away like that with your head held high, it was magnificent." "I can't believe how well you protected yourself," my father added, his voice carrying the pride of someone who had taught his daughter to be prepared for any situation. "This plan B of yours, it was brilliant. You were prepared for the worst while hoping for the best." Emma stopped by again, bringing dinner and updates from our mutual friends. "Everyone's talking about it," she reported, "and everyone's on your side. Mark's being completely ostracized. Even his own friends are saying his behavior was unacceptable." "What about Brenda?" I asked. Radio silence. "I think even she realizes that applauding your son for assaulting his wife isn't a good look." That evening, David called with an update on the legal proceedings. Mark's attorney contacted me this afternoon, he reported. They want to settle immediately. No alimony, clean break, and they're not even fighting the asset division. They just want this to go away as quickly and quietly as possible. What about the confidentiality agreement? They're not insisting on it anymore. I think they realize they have no leverage here. Mark's behavior was too public, too well documented. They're just trying to minimize the damage at this point. How quickly can this be finalized? With both parties cooperating, we could have the decree finalized within 30 days. It'll be one of the shortest marriages on record. After hanging up with David, I sat in my living room, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on the surreal events of the past 48 hours. 2 days ago, I had been a bride preparing for what I thought would be the happiest day of my life. Now, I was a soon-to-be-divorced woman who had successfully extracted herself from what could have been years of psychological abuse and control. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't magic. It was the result of careful planning, clear thinking, and the courage to act decisively when the situation demanded it. It was the result of trusting my instincts, protecting my assets, and refusing to accept unacceptable behavior. My ice blue eyes reflected the city lights as I made a mental list of everything I needed to do in the coming weeks. Change my name back on all my accounts, though I had never actually changed it legally. Update my emergency contacts. Plan a proper vacation to somewhere warm and beautiful. Maybe buy myself something extravagant to celebrate my freedom. But first, I needed to write thank you notes to everyone who had supported me through this ordeal. My family, my friends, my photographer who had captured the evidence I needed, even the hotel concierge who had helped me escape that night. And I needed to write one more note to my future self. A reminder that I was strong enough to trust my instincts, brave enough to walk away from a bad situation, and smart enough to protect myself from people who would try to diminish my light. Mark had tried to break me down, to teach me my place, to show me who was boss. Instead, he had taught me something far more valuable, that I was unbreakable, that my place was wherever I chose to stand, and that the only boss of my life was me. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. My platinum bob was perfectly styled, my ice blue eyes were clear and determined, and my posture radiated confidence and strength. I looked like a woman who had survived a battle and emerged victorious. I looked like a woman who was ready for whatever came next. I looked like myself again, finally and completely free. 3 weeks after Mark smashed cake into my face at our wedding reception, the divorce was finalized. The decree was dated exactly 28 days after our marriage certificate, making it one of the shortest marriages in county records. The local courthouse clerk, who had processed thousands of divorce cases over her career, later told David that she'd never seen such a clear-cut case of irreconcilable differences. The settlement was everything I had hoped for and more. I retained all of my business assets, my personal property, and the funds I had contributed to our joint accounts. Mark received his personal belongings, his car, and enough money to start fresh, though significantly less than he had expected when he married a successful businesswoman. The financial impact was immediate and devastating for him, but entirely justified given his behavior. More importantly, there was no confidentiality agreement. I was free to tell my story, and Mark had no legal recourse to silence me. His attorney had advised him that fighting for a gag order would only draw more attention to his behavior, and the last thing he needed was more publicity. The video evidence was too damning, the witness testimony too overwhelming. The social consequences for Mark were swift and severe. His investment firm, citing conduct unbecoming and concerns about his judgment, placed him on administrative leave pending an internal review. The review concluded that while his personal behavior didn't directly violate company policy, it raised serious questions about his character and decision-making abilities. He was quietly encouraged to seek employment elsewhere. The firm couldn't risk being associated with someone whose assault of his wife had been witnessed by 200 people and captured in high-definition video. His fraternity brothers, who had initially seemed amused by his alpha male display, quickly distanced themselves as the full scope of his behavior became clear. The video footage showed not just the cake assault, but his face during the attack, the cold calculation, the deliberate cruelty, the complete absence of remorse. It was impossible to dismiss as a prank or momentary lapse in judgment. Brenda, his mother, became something of a pariah in her social circle. The women who had once admired her traditional values were horrified by her applause during the assault. Her garden club quietly asked her to step down from her leadership position, and she was uninvited from several upcoming social events. "I never realized how twisted her thinking was," one of her former friends told Emma at a charity luncheon. Applauding her son for humiliating his wife? What kind of mother does that? Meanwhile, my life was undergoing a remarkable transformation. The clarity I had felt that night in the reception hall had crystallized into a new sense of purpose and direction. I had always been successful in business, but now I felt truly powerful, not because I had destroyed Mark, but because I had saved myself. The strategic thinking that had protected me from Mark's abuse was exactly the kind of skill that corporate clients valued. My consulting firm experienced an unexpected boom. Word of my strategic thinking and decisive action had spread through professional networks, and potential clients were impressed by someone who could handle a personal crisis with such composure and intelligence. "If she can plan that well under pressure," one CEO remarked to David, "imagine what she can do for our corporate restructuring." Within 6 months, I had hired 2 new associates and moved to a larger office space. My platinum bob became something of a trademark: sharp, modern, uncompromising. My ice blue eyes, which had once been described as intimidating by insecure men, were now seen as a sign of clarity and strength. The wedding photographer, who had captured every moment of Mark's assault, became an unexpected ally. She had been horrified by what she witnessed and was relieved when I told her I wanted the evidence preserved rather than destroyed. "I've photographed hundreds of weddings," she told me over coffee a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. "I've seen bridezillas, drunk groomsmen, family drama of every kind, but I've never seen anything like what Mark did to you. The calculated cruelty of it." It was chilling. She had also captured something else in her photos, the moment of my transformation. There was a series of shots showing my face during the assault, the initial shock, the dawning realization, and then the cold clarity that had guided every decision afterward. "You can see the exact moment you decided to leave him," she observed, showing me the images on her laptop. "It's remarkable. Most people would have been crying or screaming. You just crystallized." The most unexpected consequence of the divorce was the flood of support I received from other women. My story had spread through social media and word of mouth, and I began receiving messages from women who had experienced similar situations, men who had tried to diminish them, control them, or break down their confidence. "You showed me what strength looks like," one woman wrote. "I've been making excuses for my husband's behavior for years, but watching your story unfold made me realize I deserve better." Another wrote, "I'm a successful attorney, but my fiancé keeps making comments about how I intimidate people, how I should tone myself down. Your wedding story was a wake-up call. I broke up with him yesterday." The messages kept coming, hundreds of them, from women who had found courage in my example. I started receiving speaking requests from women's professional organizations, business schools, and corporate leadership conferences. Not to talk about divorce or relationships, but to discuss strategic thinking, crisis management, and the importance of having contingency plans in both business and personal life. Plan B isn't about expecting failure, I would tell these audiences. It's about respecting yourself enough to protect your interests and your future. It's about understanding that hope is not a strategy. 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a journalist at a national business magazine who wanted to write a feature about women who had turned personal crises into professional opportunities. "Your story has become something of a legend in business circles," she explained. "The way you protected yourself, the strategic thinking, the flawless execution, it's being taught in some business schools as a case study in crisis management." The article, when it was published, focused primarily on my business acumen and the growth of my consulting firm. The wedding incident was mentioned only briefly, as an example of how the same strategic thinking that made me successful in business had served me in my personal life. But the response to the article was overwhelming. I received job offers from Fortune 500 companies, invitations to speak at major conferences, and requests for interviews from several television programs. My story had struck a chord with people who admired strategic thinking and decisive action. Mark, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public view. He had found a new job at a smaller investment firm in another city, and according to mutual acquaintances, he was keeping a much lower profile. His social media accounts had been scrubbed of all references to our relationship, and he had apparently learned to keep his opinions about women's behavior to himself. "He's been neutered," Emma observed with satisfaction during one of our regular dinners. "Completely defanged. No one trusts his judgment anymore." "Good," I replied simply. "Maybe he'll think twice before trying to humiliate another woman." A year after the divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. The organizer mentioned that they had initially considered inviting Mark to speak about learning from failure, but had decided against it. "He never actually acknowledged that what he did was wrong," she explained. "He keeps framing it as a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. Someone who can't take responsibility for their actions has nothing valuable to teach." This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Mark's downfall, not that he had suffered consequences, but that he had failed to learn from them. His inability to acknowledge the severity of his behavior, to understand why it was wrong, to show genuine remorse, had made him unemployable in many circles. Meanwhile, I had built something beautiful from the ashes of that disaster. My business was thriving, my personal life was fulfilling, and I had discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had also learned something valuable about the nature of abuse and control. Mark's behavior hadn't started with the cake assault. It had been building for months through subtle comments, attempts to control my choices, and efforts to diminish my confidence. The wedding incident was simply the moment when his mask finally slipped completely. "The cake was just the weapon," I explained to a group of young professional women during a mentorship event. "The real assault was on my sense of self, my right to shine, my permission to be successful and beautiful and confident. He wanted to break me down gradually, to teach me to dim my own light so his could appear brighter." "How did you recognize it?" one of the women asked. "I almost didn't," I admitted. I was so focused on making the relationship work, on being understanding and accommodating, that I nearly missed the signs. It was only when I started documenting the pattern that I could see it clearly. This led to one of my most popular speaking topics: the importance of trusting your instincts and maintaining your independence, even in loving relationships. I would tell audiences about the value of having your own money, your own friends, your own goals, and the critical importance of never apologizing for your success. A partner who truly loves you will celebrate your achievements, not try to diminish them, I would say. They will want you to shine as brightly as possible, because your light reflects well on their judgment in choosing you. 2 years after the divorce, I was featured on the cover of a major business magazine as one of the top 40 under 40 entrepreneurs in the country. The photo showed me in my office, my platinum bob perfectly styled, my ice blue eyes gazing confidently at the camera. I was wearing a sharp black suit that accentuated my tall frame and Scandinavian features. The article mentioned the divorce only in passing, noting that I had successfully navigated a challenging personal situation while building a thriving business. The focus was entirely on my professional achievements and my reputation as a strategic thinker and crisis management expert. But for those who knew the full story, the subtext was clear. I had not just survived Mark's attempt to break me down, I had used it as fuel to build something even more impressive. The magazine arrived in my office on a Tuesday morning, and I spent a few minutes looking at the cover photo. The woman staring back at me was confident, successful, and completely in control of her destiny. She looked like someone who had faced down a crisis and emerged stronger. She looked like someone who would never again accept being diminished, controlled, or silenced. She looked like exactly who I had always been meant to be. That afternoon, Emma stopped by my office to celebrate the magazine feature. We opened a bottle of champagne and toasted not just my professional success, but the journey that had led me here. "Do you ever regret marrying him?" she asked as we stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "Marrying Mark was a mistake, but it was also an education. It taught me things about myself I might never have learned otherwise. It showed me how strong I really am, how capable I am of protecting myself, how much I value my independence and my right to shine." "And the cake incident?" I smiled, my ice blue eyes reflecting the afternoon light. "The cake incident was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the moment I stopped making excuses for unacceptable behavior and started demanding the respect I deserved." "Do you think he ever realized what he lost?" "I don't think Mark is capable of that level of self-reflection," I replied. But it doesn't matter what he realizes. What matters is what I gained, the knowledge that I am unbreakable, that I can trust my instincts, and that I never have to settle for less than I deserve. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been a successful woman who was slowly allowing herself to be diminished by a man who saw her light as a threat. Today, I was a successful woman who had learned to guard that light fiercely and share it generously with those who deserved it. The wedding cake assault that was supposed to break me had instead set me free. Mark's attempt to teach me my place had instead taught me my worth. And his mother's applause for his cruelty had shown me exactly the kind of person I never wanted to become. I was Astrid Lindqvist, and I was exactly where I belonged, standing tall, shining bright, and completely in control of my own destiny. The cake was just the beginning of my real life. 5 years after Mark Henley smashed wedding cake into my face, I stood at the podium of the largest conference center in Chicago, addressing an audience of 2,000 women entrepreneurs. My platinum bob, now a signature look that had been featured in countless business publications, caught the stage lights as I concluded my keynote speech on strategic crisis management. The moment someone tries to diminish your light, I said, my ice blue eyes scanning the audience, is the moment you must shine the brightest, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. The standing ovation lasted for 3 minutes. As I walked off the stage, I felt the same crystalline clarity I had experienced that night in the country club reception hall, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. My consulting firm now employed 47 people across 3 offices in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. We specialized in crisis management and strategic restructuring, and our client list included some of the most prestigious companies in the country. The business had grown by 400% since my divorce, built on a reputation for clear thinking under pressure and the ability to see solutions others missed. But the professional success, while satisfying, wasn't the most meaningful change in my life. That honor belonged to the relationships I had built with the thousands of women who had reached out to me over the years, sharing their own stories of diminishment and their journeys toward reclaiming their power. I had started a mentorship program called Plan B, which provided strategic planning resources for women in vulnerable situations. We helped them document concerning behaviors, protect their assets, and develop exit strategies if needed. The program had assisted over 1,500 women in creating their own contingency plans, and I received regular updates about lives that had been transformed. "You saved my life," one woman had written just last week. Not dramatically, but literally. My husband was slowly isolating me from my friends, my family, my career. Your story showed me the pattern before it was too late. The personal side of my life had also flourished in unexpected ways. I had learned to trust my instincts completely, to value my independence, and to never again apologize for my success. When I eventually began dating again, 3 years after the divorce, I approached relationships with the same strategic thinking that had served me in business. I met Dr. James Chen at a medical conference where I was speaking about crisis management in healthcare settings. He was an emergency room physician, brilliant, compassionate, and completely secure in his own achievements. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours, covering everything from healthcare policy to Swedish literature to the psychology of decision-making under pressure. "You're intimidating," he told me on our 3rd date, but he was smiling when he said it. In the best possible way. "You know exactly who you are and what you want. It's refreshing." "Does that bother you?" I asked, my ice blue eyes studying his face for any sign of the insecurity I had learned to recognize. "Are you kidding? I spend my days making life and death decisions. The last thing I want is a partner who can't make a choice about dinner. Your strength is one of the things I find most attractive about you." We had been together for 18 months now, and he had never once suggested that I tone myself down, dress differently, or be less successful. When I received job offers or speaking requests, he celebrated with me. When I bought a new car or redecorated my office, he admired my choices. When I was featured on magazine covers, he proudly shared the articles with his colleagues. "You compliment him beautifully," Emma observed during a dinner where the 4 of us, Emma and her husband, James and I, had gathered to celebrate my latest business milestone. "He doesn't diminish you to elevate himself. He just appreciates you. It was true. James understood that my success reflected well on his judgment in choosing me, not poorly on his ability to control me. He was proud to be with a woman who commanded respect and admiration, rather than threatened by it. The contrast with Mark was so stark it was almost comical. Where Mark had seen my achievements as competition, James saw them as evidence of the qualities he admired. Where Mark had tried to control my choices, James supported my autonomy. Where Mark had been jealous of attention I received, James was proud to be the partner of someone others looked up to. The difference, I explained to a group of young women during a recent mentorship session, is between someone who wants to possess you and someone who wants to partner with you. A possessor sees your individual success as a threat to their control. A partner sees your individual success as a contribution to your shared future. Mark, meanwhile, had largely faded from public consciousness. He had married again 2 years after our divorce, a much younger woman who worked as a receptionist at his new firm and seemed content to defer to his opinions on everything from her wardrobe to her career goals. According to mutual acquaintances, the marriage appeared successful, at least on the surface. "She's very sweet," Emma reported after running into them at a restaurant. "Very quiet, very accommodating. She laughs at all his jokes and lets him order for her at dinner." I think she's exactly what he was looking for. I felt no animosity toward Mark's new wife. If she was genuinely happy in a traditional, deferential role, that was her choice. My concern was only for women who found themselves gradually diminished against their will, who were slowly taught to apologize for their own light. Brenda had also remarried, a widower from her church who seemed to appreciate her traditional values and didn't question her belief that wives should support their husbands' egos above all else. She had moved to Florida and, according to family gossip, spent her days organizing church social events and criticizing younger women's choices. "She's found her tribe," my mother observed with characteristic Swedish directness. "Women who believe that a man's comfort is more important than a woman's dignity. Let her be happy with them." The 5th anniversary of my wedding disaster had passed quietly, marked only by a small celebration with Emma and James. We had dinner at my apartment, and James had surprised me with a beautifully bound photo book documenting my professional achievements over the past 5 years. "From crisis to triumph," he had written in the inscription. "To the woman who turned her worst day into the foundation of her best life." Looking through the photos, speaking engagements, business milestones, magazine covers, moments of genuine joy and satisfaction, I was struck by how completely my life had transformed. The woman in these pictures was confident, powerful, and completely authentic. She looked like someone who had never apologized for her success or dimmed her light for anyone's comfort. She looked like who I had always been meant to be. That night, as James slept beside me, I lay awake thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this place. 5 years ago, I had been a successful woman who was slowly allowing herself to be diminished. Today, I was a successful woman who had learned to guard her light fiercely and share it generously. The cake assault that was supposed to humiliate me had instead liberated me. Mark's attempt to break me down had instead taught me how unbreakable I really was. And his mother's applause for his cruelty had shown me exactly the kind of person I never wanted to become. I thought about all the women who had reached out to me over the years, who had found the courage to leave toxic situations or demand better treatment. I thought about the young professionals who attended my speaking events, learning to trust their instincts and value their independence. I thought about the mentorship program participants who were building their own Plan B strategies. Mark had tried to teach me my place, and in a way, he had succeeded. He had taught me that my place was wherever I chose to stand, shining as brightly as I wanted to shine, surrounded by people who celebrated my light rather than trying to extinguish it. My place was at the head of my own company, making strategic decisions and solving complex problems. My place was on conference stages, sharing hard-won wisdom with women who needed to hear it. My place was in a relationship with someone who saw my strength as an asset rather than a threat. My place was exactly where I was, free, successful, and completely in control of my own destiny. As I drifted off to sleep, my ice blue eyes reflecting the city lights through the bedroom window, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Even the painful parts, even the humiliation and betrayal, even the moment when cake was ground into my hair and dress in front of 200 witnesses. Especially that moment. Because that was the moment I stopped accepting less than I deserved and started demanding everything I was worth. That was the moment I transformed from a woman who hoped for the best into a woman who planned for it, protected it, and never again apologized for achieving it. The wedding cake assault was supposed to be my breaking point. Instead, it became my turning point, the moment I learned that I was unbreakable, unstoppable, and absolutely unwilling to be diminished by anyone ever again. Mark Henley had given me an unexpected gift that night, the crystal-clear knowledge of my own worth and the absolute determination to protect it. It wasn't the gift he intended to give, but it was exactly the gift I needed to receive. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. My name is Astrid Lindqvist, and this is my story of how the worst day of my life became the foundation of my best life. How a moment of intended humiliation became a moment of liberation. How a man's attempt to break me instead taught me exactly how strong I really was. The cake was just the beginning.
Astrid, thank you for your raw honesty. It's truly moving. This story uniquely shows that strategic preparation, like your Plan B, can turn toxic control into triumphant independence, teaching us to guard our self-worth fiercely. It's a universal wake-up call about reclaiming power from those who try to dim us. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.